Thank you, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the Best and Brightest Elite Suite Education Series. We have a fantastic lineup of programming for you this year, and we hope that you'll find innovative practices and fresh ideas that you can use in your company. As the operator instructed, you're invited to submit questions all during the program, and any comments you might have in the chat feature. We'll review them and go over them at the end of the program. I'll be monitoring them throughout the presentation, so please feel free to chime in, or if you have any problems, by all means let us know. Following the program, you'll receive from me a SurveyMonkey evaluation, and in that evaluation will be your opportunity to apply for 1 unit of continuing education credit, and that will be the only way that you can receive a certificate. It's not the webinar survey, it'll be the SurveyMonkey survey that I will personally send you later. So it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. Sally Stetson is co-founder and HR practice leader of Salveson Stetson Group, and Todd Hohauser is the CEO of Harvey Hohauser and Associates. Both of them are board members of the international group IIC Partners, which is the 8th largest executive search firm in the world. And Todd is currently the chairman. Their presentation is based on the results of a global study of chief human resource officers, and we're very pleased that they are willing to share their findings with us. So thank you very much, Sally and Todd. Go ahead and take it away.
Okay, thank you very much, Jan. I appreciate it. This is Todd Hohauser. I'm going to get us started here and tee up Sally for the majority of the presentation. We are talking about the traits and characteristics of successful CHROs. This presentation is a result of an extensive survey which Sally led, and we'll tell you a little bit about in a moment. We did this survey through IIC Partners. As Jan mentioned, IIC Partners is an international group of boutique search firms that was founded 33 years ago. And the idea behind IIC Partners is that we have specialists in every market who are working together to assist our clients in recruiting and retaining top talent. As Jan mentioned, I'm presently the chair of IIC Partners, and Sally also serves on the board of directors. A little bit about Sally. As Jan mentioned, she is the principal and co-founder of Salveson Stetson Group, which is in Radnor, Pennsylvania. She's supporting clients across the country identifying and placing senior-level executives in diverse functions ranging from HR, finance, sales and marketing, and general management. Salveson Stetson has over 18 employees, and Sally leads the HR specialty practice group for the firm, as well as is the leader of the HR practice group for IIC Partners. Salveson Stetson is a member of the MPI family of companies, which also includes the first group at New Brick Partners. Sally has more than 25 years of experience in providing recruiting and consulting services to a broad range of organizations, from pharmaceutical manufacturing, hospitals, professional services, and on and on. She's worked with senior management in evaluating and implementing effective communication plans during times of change, and she's particularly focused on assuring the right fit for candidates. Sally holds a Master's of Arts from Drexel University and a Bachelor of Science from University of Delaware. She is currently an emeritus board member of the Please Touch Museum and serves as a director of the board for the Modern Group. In addition, Sally has served on the board of the Human Resource Planning Society, the Girl Scouts of Southeastern Pennsylvania, and the Philadelphia Human Resources Planning Group, as well as the vice chair of the Americas for IIC Partners. So at this time, I'm going to hand the microphone over to Sally, and she is going to walk you through some of our findings and learnings from our survey, and you will still get to hear from me from time to time as I chime in. So with that, over to you, Sally.
Thanks, Todd. Just to give everyone a little bit of a sense of this survey, We have an HR practice group at IIC Partners, and all of us had an opportunity, there were 8 of us, that interviewed more than 20 human resources executives across the globe. And we talked to them about what it takes to really be a successful Chief HR Officer. And so that's what really our discussion will be today. In the event you want a copy of the white paper, you can go on to IIC Partners website, which is iicpartners.com, go to the Insights tab, and then there'll be a white paper on this topic along with other articles as well. But in the event that you'd like to download it, you can certainly do that. So let's just get into the heart of the survey. So one of the major questions that we asked the HR executives was what background and experiences are needed to be a successful CHRO. And probably these answers aren't completely a surprise to you, but let's talk about each one of them a little bit. So number 1 was a strategic mindset. So in order to be a successful CHRO, clearly these executives felt that you needed to see the big picture in order to understand how all the details fit in. But at the same time, you also have to have some willingness to get into the weeds when needed, and can't determine or consider that those kinds of issues are beneath you, but sometimes those details help you see the broader picture. But clearly the focus is being able to see that broader picture and have a strategic point of view, if you will. The second and third points are pretty parallel: outstanding interpersonal skills and emotional intelligence. Probably no surprise to you, you really do need to have very strong written and verbal communication skills, and clearly presentation skills, knowing that generally CHRO will give presentations in front of the employee, in front of the workforce, as well as at the board level in most cases. So presentation skills are pretty critical. Being articulate, being able to speak extemporaneously with employee groups and internal client groups as well as external is pretty important. And then just the ability to have a CHRO go out and comfortably seek out employees, talk to them at all levels. That kind of goes into the category of having outstanding interpersonal skills. And then in companionship, the emotional intelligence piece is something that I'm sure all of you hear quite a bit about, and it's such an important trait that's needed for this role, as well as most executives. But it's your listening skills. You have your antenna up, so you're hearing and have the insight and instincts of what is on an individual or a culture or a workforce. So having that antenna is really important. And then also being authentic, being trustworthy, and also I have heard this from one of the interviewers, and I've certainly seen it myself, but as a CHRO, you want to make sure that when you're talking to anyone that they have their full attention and that the person feels, even though they might be in a room full of people, that you're speaking just to them, and that's a very unique trait that would make someone very, very successful. The next 3, business acumen being one, is really important and something that's reiterated throughout the study. Having a breadth of business knowledge and background, whether you've worked for a startup company, a larger complex global company, different industries, the more breadth and depth and diversity of business experiences, most likely the more perspective that you'll bring to the company. And also with that is, have you been with a company that's been growth-oriented versus shrinking? Have you been involved with mergers and acquisitions? Have you been through a reorganization? All of those particular business experiences would bring a lot to bear that would be helpful tools for a CHRO to be able to pull out. And then in addition, just on the HR side, having a real breadth of generalist experience across all the functional areas. Executive presence was very important as well, and that's fairly self-explanatory, but it's being poised, having the posture and presence, holding eye contact projecting that level of confidence that people would expect, and then also just having a very professional image is also important as well. Because a person can have all of these and then miss executive presence, and they're just not seen as credible in the workplace. Lastly, the other item that was highly commented on was having board and executive compensation experience. Someone moving into their very first CHRO opportunity sometimes will not have it, but it will be critical for them to be successful. So having a solid understanding of the fundamentals of executive compensation as well as compensation benefits are really important for CHRO, and the ability to interact effectively with board members and the demands that come with board presentations and board issues. So those things are all important, and sometimes some people will come into the role without that experience. Generally, they're supported through outside consultants to ensure that they have what's needed. So another question, what positively impacted the CHRO's professional development throughout their career? And one interesting point that a number of the CHROs that we talked to who are from different countries talked about when you're working with employees who are in emerging markets or in countries who have volatile political scenarios or situations. You think about what's going on in Latin America right now. Those all impact a company. So many CHROs say that has really embellished and expanded their own professional development, understanding what's going on around the world and being able to relate and respond effectively to those issues, because many times they're not. Sometimes they're anticipated, but many times they're not. Another issue or event that's really been very helpful to a CHRO in their own professional development is cited by these leaders, were having other effective leaders and mentors that they could learn from. So a number of people said that they really looked at other leaders in their organizations or previous organizations and tried to model their behavior or their techniques that make them successful. So having those mentors were very, very important, whether it's in previous organizations, previous bosses or current bosses, that those people really help contribute to their growth and development. I thought this was also a very interesting perspective. Several of the CHROs talked about their own personal global relocation situations where they moved to a different country, had to move their family, and it gave them incredible insight into the impact that situation creates on a family, on an individual in terms of the adjustments and unexpected issues that came up. So one of the CHROs in the U.S. had this experience, and it made him much more sensitive to the issues rather than just looking at a policy. He understood the issues behind the policy, which he felt made him more effective as an empathetic leader in understanding the issues that go around a global relocation. And then personal career transitions. They clearly have shaped a number of people's lives on the CHRO side. If you've either been laid off before, if you made a transition from one company to the next and it was a little rocky, you've learned from those experiences, and those take you to the next level and help you be a more empathetic leader as well. So what are the most pressing challenges for a CHRO today? The number one is probably doesn't surprise you at all, and that is the difficulty and challenges with hiring the right kind of talent. And they really discussed how difficult it is to recruit talent and retain top talent as well as develop talent. So creating a culture where you can scan talent and identify talent in advance is something that a lot of CHROs don't necessarily do but want to do. And then putting putting processes in place to help engage and motivate employees, to encourage them to want to join the company. All of that is really one of the most pressing challenges for CHROs today. So that was the number one issue. The second is managing the expectations of millennials, and I think many of us have had those experiences. Many of millennials will have different career expectations than, let's say, the baby boomers. Their expectations are that they want new experience or promotion in 18 to 24 months. So having those professional development opportunities for millennials are very, very important, and that's what these CHROs mentioned. Todd, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, thank you, Sally. One thing I found particularly interesting, and I know that Salveson Stetson in Philadelphia is doing a number of these searches currently, completing one of these searches for a CHRO here in Detroit with a very large multinational automotive supplier whose revenue is in the billions. Executive leadership really asked us to get somebody who understands how to communicate with the millennial workforce, just like you mentioned. The one thing that I found tremendously surprising was it wasn't from the perspective of recruiting, although that is very, very important, but it was more from the perspective of retention. So that client, and many of our clients have said to us, we really need somebody who's savvy in communicating with our millennial workforce. So that could be developing an app to communicate with them, or text messaging system, something that is through a medium that they're more comfortable with. So it certainly is helpful for folks who are looking at the CHR role to have that experience in recruiting, but also is very important to executive leadership and ownership to have the experiences in retention as well. And so that means communicating with that generation of workforce in a way that they're used to. I just thought that was very interesting.
That is, Todd. No, it is, and it's important to many HR leaders will span working for very different companies with different geographic populations, including working with a lot of millennials or baby boomers or hourly workers or highly clinical, scientifically highly educated employees. So the ability to flex and really determine and figure out what their needs are is really important to be effective to meet their needs. So the third pressing challenge was really working across different economic and global political environments. We even look at the U.S. Many employees have very strong opinions across party lines in the U.S. about our leadership currently, and if we look at what's going on with Brexit, in Europe, there are just so many issues that people feel very strongly about one way or another, and how do you navigate through that so that the environments are people can be heard when it's appropriate, but being respectful of people's opinions. It just makes it a little more challenging to navigate, and that's what the CHROs talked about as well. The fourth issue was maintaining employee engagement, and I think this is something that everybody can relate to. So you recruit a new employee who has so much capability and is high potential, and then they become bored because they've done all they think they can do. So what can either a manager, a leader, or a CHRO do to help not only an individual employee be engaged, but then a total workforce? So it's thinking through, how do you motivate? How do you inspire employees? How do you retain talent during times of change when you're going through perhaps a merger or an acquisition or a significant time of transformation? All those issues are very, very difficult. They talked about the need to communicate and provide feedback to employees, particularly during times of change. And then also just informing employees about what's going on in the business, whether it's a new product launch, a new acquisition that's occurring, and giving employees a real sense of ownership and pride in the business and what they're doing. All of those things are important in terms of maintaining employee engagement, and that's something many, many CHROs are very highly focused on today. And many will do an employment engagement survey, but then the key, what the CHRO said, is what you do with that information. It's great to do a survey, but what do you do with that information, and how do you apply it to the workforce? And then lastly, with social media pressures. Some companies have social media policies, some don't, but certainly many employees use social media inside the company and outside the companies. So it's how do you navigate this new world of social media, and then also how do you work with the other kinds of social media outlets like Glassdoor. The feedback on Glassdoor can certainly potentially impact potential future employees in terms of the way the company is viewed, for right or for wrong. So being able to sort through all of those issues on social media are really important, and avoiding them can really be a missed opportunity. So that was also something that was very important. So what are the most sought after traits for HR executives in the marketplace? Leadership capabilities, number one. Can the HR executive effectively lead a team? Can it develop a team? Can it motivate a team? Is that HR leader a good colleague to other members of their senior team? So leadership is not only managing their own team, but it's working effectively with other members across the company and being seen as someone who's a really effective role model. And it's hard sometimes to define, and every company defines leadership in a little bit of a different way, but that is certainly very critical. The second trait was being able to lead, facilitate, and drive change. It's unusual today for any company not to be going through some form of change or transformation. So their HR leader needs to be adept at understanding change management methodologies, processes, and looking at human behavior. How can they, as an HR leader, communicate a change, knowing that it probably needs to be communicated at multiple times at multiple levels, and thinking through some communication methods and processes throughout all of the change process, if you will. And so driving change is a little bit differently than facilitating and leading change. So being able to really be patient but adept at communicating and helping a company navigate through times of transformation is very, very important. Being a coach and advisor, whether that's to the CEO, other members of the senior team, their HR colleagues, other employees in general, is really important. So having those interpersonal skills where you have effective listening skills, but then at the same time can coach, advise, and be a trusted advisor. If you're not a trusted advisor, people will not come to you, nor will they want to share with you what's going on. And an HR executive will really be able to learn a lot about an environment and a culture and what's going on in that environment and culture by being sought after as a coach and advisor. Emotional intelligence is also sought after trait. We talked about that earlier, and that's someone who is an effective listener, who has the interpersonal style and ability to relate well in an authentic way, in a genuine way, to most people. And that's something that's hard to learn. Sometimes it's just what you have, but it's clearly something that's always rated highly as an effective trait. The other is really being strategic, but at the same time willing to roll up one's sleeves. And I'm sure Todd agrees with me that in almost every search that we do, whether it's an HR executive or a business executive, and it doesn't matter how high up on the ladder they are, that is a trait that's always mentioned. Need to be strategic, but many times there are things you can't delegate things to, and so you need to roll up your sleeves and get into the weeds and the details. And then lastly, it's really a business focus, is understanding the business, getting your head around the trends and the patterns in the business, and being intellectually curious to always want to understand what's going on. HR can no longer be separate from the business. It really has to be integrated into the business and be a part of helping that business grow. And the only way that that happens is by understanding and being a part of the business. I think, Todd, you wanted to add another trait that you also believed is sought after.
Yeah, thanks, Sally. It really marries well into what you were talking about, EI, emotional intelligence, and the like. And I just find it fascinating when we look at the results of this survey and we talk to our clients, thinking in regard to the timeline of how this position has changed over the years. 20 years ago, when we were recruiting VPs of HR, we would talk to folks about having a seat at the table and having that business acumen that you talked about earlier. 20 years ago, it was very difficult for the CHRO to get into that suite and help to solve problems. Now, because we have this war for talent, because we're seeing in this country unemployment at record low levels, it's becoming glaringly apparent that business owners and leaders need that business partner. That seat at the table, we used to say, is coming more and more into play. So a lot of times they talk about gravitas. Folks want to have a CHRO who can do webinars like this, or that can disseminate information and messages to the team, to be an internal face to the organization, not just somebody who is in that department, but really somebody that's going in and out of many departments and being an overall leader and face of the company. I particularly had one feedback, call that gravitas. So I found that very fascinating as well, how that links into this particular slide, Sally.
Great, thank you, and I agree with you, Todd. Gravitas is hard to define, but it's easy to see when you see it. So what are the characteristics for an ideal CHRO for the future? What do CHROs need to have to be viewed as effective as we look into future organizations? And these were the key characteristics that came up from the survey. Number one, no surprise, is being able to be resilient and adaptable, being able to adjust to change, being able to pivot when needed, when the business changes, being able to take different roles at times, and adjusting to whatever happens in the marketplace. So I think the worst trait to have is being rigid and not being able to be adaptable and to being resilient. And resiliency is also another descriptor for being able to bounce back when tough things happen. So when there's a disappointment, when something happens that you don't expect, being able to rise up and change and shift gears, but still not lose your drive and your focus. And that's really important. And I think usually most leaders also want that of their employees as well. One of the CHROs brought this point up, and I thought this was very important and very interesting, is keeping a real positive attitude and being an optimist for the organization. If the CHRO isn't optimistic for the future of the organization, no one else will be. So I think as a CHRO, it would be incredibly invaluable to always keep that in mind, is thinking through how can you be seen as a cheerleader in an appropriate way of being optimistic of where the company's going and what the company can achieve together. And I just thought that was a very interesting point. Fourthly is change management, being able to, and these are some themes that you've heard before, but being able to manage change, drive change, be really savvy in understanding all the steps that it takes on a multiple levels in order to manage change, because change is here to stay, and that's a critical piece. And then also courage, being able to speak up and make tough decisions even when they're not very popular is important. A CEO always wants a CHRO to be able to put a stake in the ground and be an advocate for employees and the culture of the organization. So being able to speak up and support the organization is really important. And again, even when it's not always the most popular decision to make. And then instincts. I think instincts can be very powerful to all of us, but we don't always listen to them. And this is generally what 2 or 3 CHROs said is know when to act and when to pick your battles. And you do need to listen to your gut. If you're acting all the time or picking every single battle, you're going to be not seen as credible. If you know when to pick your battles and when to act on an issue and do it selectively, you're going to be more successful. So it's being able to have those instincts and understand when to act and when not to act, which is a characteristic that was emphasized by these top global HR leaders. What I'd like to do now is reintroduce Todd, and he has a number of questions that he would like to ask to further elaborate on our discussions of successful traits for CHROs.
Thanks, Sally. And I'll remind everyone else that they can type their questions in the chat box, and we'll get to those in the ensuing minutes. I wanted to bring to you, Sally, some questions because as you led the HR practice group in this study and survey and amalgamated the data, it was fascinating to redistribute that to our market here in the Detroit area. And we fielded a number of questions that folks who are interested in becoming CHROs or just business owners, business leaders had asked us. And one of those questions had to do with critical competencies. And I know you addressed that in the presentation. But certainly thinking about the folks that are here on the webinar, that there may be folks that are aspiring to become a CHRO, and I received the question, what critical competencies would prepare somebody to become a successful CHRO?
Well, it's a good question, and I think I'd like to address it this way. And Todd, you can also, I'm sure, bring your perspective as well. But I think the breadth of experience and having diverse experiences is really critical. So I believe that someone really prepares themselves for this role by working in several different companies. If you've worked for one company your entire career, which can be very valuable as well, but you lack the diversity and breadth of experience. So working for several different kinds of companies, whether it's one's a small company, another's a large complex company, one's a growth-oriented company, one's very involved with acquisitions. The breadth of experiences will allow the potential future CHRO to draw from those experiences to be more effective. So I think the breadth of experiences is one critical competency. I think the second is the ability to work effectively at all levels, to be able to relate well with the CEO and the senior team, but also with their existing team and their peers, as well as with employees that might be at an hourly or a non-exempt level. So it's being able to span the capability and ability to interact at all levels and be seen as a credible resource, because a CHRO is an advocate for the organization. So that's another critical competency. And then the other is looking at all the functional areas within HR. So being an HR business partner is really important, but then also having a stint, if you can, in compensation and benefits, or diving into a compensation project is really important. And then, because we've talked about the importance of talent, is serving in maybe even heading up a COE in talent management and talent acquisition, that being important as well. Perhaps it's also having an opportunity to go to another country and experience what it's like to lead HR from that perspective. And then finally, my other thought, which I've seen aspiring CHROs, which can be very valuable, is go outside of HR. Take on a sales role, a marketing role, a leadership role in the business, because I think it prepares you with a different perspective that when you do return to HR, you think a little bit differently. I don't know, Todd, is there anything you'd add to that?
Well, it sounds like what you're saying is really to let the powers that be know that you're interested in the diversity of experiences you've just listed out. You really have to communicate to the organization that that's of interest to you.
Yes, that, and then also just taking initiative to do that. So hopefully if you're aspiring, you have a really good mentor, whether that's in the CHRO or a more senior leader, and you inform them of your interest in gaining more experiences and ask them the question, how did they get to the position where they are? And what experiences did they find to be extremely helpful? So I think by being a really good, if we go back to that emotional intelligence piece, being a really good listener, but then also taking the initiative to ask key leaders how they got to where they are, and taking the initiative. Taking an initiative is so important. If by laying back you're not going to get anywhere, you're going to find most people are going to get further on in their careers if they do take the initiative and have those sometimes uncomfortable conversations to let the leaders know of their aspirations.
Good point. Good point. Thank you. Well, one of the other questions that we received as we disseminated the survey had to do with best practices. And I think it's really easy to talk about SHRM, and we should remind everybody about SHRM, of course. But I wonder if you can talk a little bit about best practices, because in a HR executive's daily life, it's tremendously busy. You've got comp, benefits, you've got all those aspects we mentioned in the presentation. And at the same time, you have to stay on top of your game, notwithstanding all the laws that might be rolling out that you have to integrate and understand. So I wondered if any of these CHROs talked to you about what they did to stay updated on the best practices in their field.
They did, and you're right, Todd. It's so hard when you have a really busy schedule and you may have families at home to lift your head up and take time to go outside your day-to-day work to become updated. So what are the things that they have done, and what are the things have we seen with our clients? A couple of things. One is join a local professional HR organization, attend a conference outside the area. You want to, whether it's to become certified through SHRM, whether it's joining an HR networking group, those are really invaluable in terms of meeting other people, hearing new perspectives, and obviously when you're really busy you can't do all of those things. So I would suggest that many of you that might be in this position is experiment a little bit. Whether it's going to your local professional HR association and not only going but volunteering and taking on a committee or taking on a project that might be going on. So what you want to do is you want to be introduced to other HR professionals from other companies and learn what they're doing. Ask good questions. Create a small networking group where you can go back and forth even on email or on phone calls about what's going on, how have they handled this, what are they doing for succession planning, how are they handling performance management, all of those things. It's basically networking is the bottom line, is trying to find out how do you stay networked. And what do most of these HR folks say is that really was critical for them was having strong networks, building those networks, and it made them a much better leader because they're aware what other people are doing in the field across different industries.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, I've got just a couple more questions that came in before the presentation, and then we'll go to some of the participants' questions, and folks can just type those in the Q&A box. Before we get to participants' questions, I just want to talk a little bit about the traits that your clients are looking for, Sally. You know, you certainly cross a lot of different industries, as we do, manufacturing, pharmaceutical, healthcare, services, and on and on. I wonder if there are some common traits that we could look at, whether through this survey or our experiences that we could share with the participants, that our clients are looking for their top HR officer.
Yeah, and they certainly parallel what the survey says. But so if I think about the most important traits, or a couple things. One is first and foremost, that business acumen and is a business-focused executive. Secondly is that talent management piece is so important in most companies. So it's someone who has that talent management, as I call it, gene, that understands what it takes to recruit the best people and then develop and create a culture that supports them to retain them. So that's a really important issue. And then usually it's also that organizational development, organizational design perspective, and knowing that organizations are going through so much change. There's always a transformation, and having that perspective and mindset is invaluable. I've also had a number of clients that will want to know that you're informed as a CHRO about what's going on in terms of best practices out in the community. So are you networked or are you insulated? So definitely that staying connected is important to as an important trait. And then really lastly, the two are extraordinary leadership skills, and what is combined with that are the interpersonal style, the emotional intelligence. All of that kind of, in my mind, binds together. But then also someone who also has that executive comp experience. If you're looking for the top HR role, that executive comp experience is critical. So but sometimes if you've never held the top role, it's hard to get it. So I would, if you're aspiring into that role, I would go to your HR leader and ask if you could help on executive comp project. Can you work with your total rewards leader on a project? Can you take a class? There are lots of things you can do. It doesn't mean that you're going to be an expert in it, but you get some exposure, and that's the important thing. And that's a really important perspective to have. Compensation in general is important more than anything else.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sally. Well, I have a couple more questions that came in before our presentation, but one came in the Q&A here from one of our participants, and I find it a fascinating question. The question was, what are the most common reasons CHROs are not successful? So I think that's a fascinating one to contemplate, and I wonder if you want to take a stab at it first, Sally, or you'd like me to.
Well, so that's a really good reason. So that's a good question, a common reason why someone's not successful. You know, if I think about people who've fallen flat on their face, which might be too strong of a term, but it's generally they don't have the antenna and insight into how they're perceived. So they lack that interpersonal style where they're able to read the room and able to understand the issues. So it's those insights and antenna, I think, is a big issue of why they're not successful. I think another is they're just not able to get things done and accomplished. So they're either not able to persuade or influence their business clients and their senior leaders. and if they're not seen as credible, they don't get things done. And then if you don't get things done, you're not going to be in that job for a long time. Those are the two things that come to mind right away. Todd, what else would you add to that list?
Yeah, that's a great list, and I think what we're finding is that usually we're asked to come in when we're seeing the unsuccessful CHRO, and so one is that gravitas, that capability to communicate with different departments and different business units across the globe. Having that ability to have that emotional intelligence to go in and out of, I'm in Detroit, so a lot of it is manufacturing. So having that ability to walk the plant floor, but then to be in the boardroom and present to owners. And so not having that capability there. The other is we're hearing more and more just how important and how much this sort of executive leadership in the HR suite is to these companies. And they're not having somebody who's got the breadth of experience to lead. So a lot of companies are maintaining their VP of HR and saying, we need a CHRO. We need that next level up. So I think your previous comments about competencies and critical competencies to prepare folks and to kind of get out of your skill set, and go to those HR groups, but maybe go outside of that to get depth and breadth of experience is another one. That's what I would point to, Sally.
And Todd, I'd also add a couple more to it. Is I've seen some CHROs as well as business leaders, they tend to isolate themselves in their offices and tend to put their head down to get work done. But in the meantime, they've isolated themselves, and employees don't get to know them. And so they're not really seen as team players. And whether it's they lack the confidence, whether they're just overwhelmed with the work, that has also been an issue that I think has been a barrier for them to be successful.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Well, I had one more question that came in before the presentation, and then I'd like to see if any of the other participants have a question. The one question that came in prior from the results of the survey had to do with critical professional experiences that CHROs need to be more effective. And I wondered if any of the survey participants or your clients gave you specific feedback on critical experiences that CHROs need to have to be successful.
Well, I think one is having a rotation through most of the functional areas within HR, from employee relations and labor relations to an HR business partner role, to the talent functions, whether it's talent acquisition, talent management, and then total rewards, comp and benefits, and then learning and development and training and development. So having an opportunity to rotate through many of those is really important, and also an opportunity to lead them. So those experiences being most critical that I can recall from the survey. So I think that those were the primary ones, beyond the ones that we've also mentioned in the presentation. But having that functional level of experience, as well as beyond functional, is being engaged in mergers and acquisitions and culture change initiatives and major reorganizations. So again, that whole change process and being able to lead it and navigate through it kind of stretches their capabilities to allow them to be a more effective leader.
Interesting. Well, Sally, I found when we began about 20 years ago recruiting some of these top HR leaders, we were talking to a lot of folks that had JD certifications. And over the years, I've seen that go away, and folks are being more business-oriented. I wonder if any of the survey participants or what you're finding with your clients is similar. If you could speak a little bit about that JD background, that legal background that used to be so very important for HR leaders.
No one in the survey commented on that, but just my anecdotal perspective of what I've seen, I certainly know a number of CHROs who have a JD. Sometimes there are CEOs and boards that are concerned with that credential. Again, I think it's all personal preference. Do they view someone with a JD that perhaps they think more black and white, and they will become more policy driven? So I've seen that. So I don't think it's as much of a trend, but I also don't think it's a detriment either. It all depends on the person, the way they handle themselves, their interpersonal style. Are they resilient? Are they adaptable? Do they come across, if you have a JD and come across with very strong opinions and have a rigidity to you, that would be a combination that would not be viewed positively.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Well, it seems that the questions have concluded. We don't have any more questions from our participants, but I hope that everybody... Oh, there's Jan Hubbard.
Yeah, I have a question. I am not a human resource person. However, I do meet with them in our peer groups regularly. And in fact, speaking to your suggestion that people take opportunities to learn from their peers and increase their knowledge, stay updated on things, we do offer peer groups in a number of communities. And we also have an online, a virtual group that meets monthly now. So that aside, in your checklist of what are the ideal characteristics, all of them I'm very familiar with and have heard this talked about over and over again, except courage. That one surprises me, and especially, Sally, when you said, someone with a JD might seem overly aggressive or something. Most of the HR people that I know are the, I want to use a disc analogy or the colors. They're not the people that speak out. They are the people that will do the work in the background and have the emotional connection to employees. So explain how that works with that kind of personality and what you need to have that courage.
Yep. So I think it was actually a pretty insightful comment that a couple of CHROs mentioned, and I actually agree with them. A really effective CHRO, it may not show up in front of a workforce, but it might show up more behind the scenes. So it's a CHRO that will speak up to the CEO or other senior leaders when things perhaps need to change or need to take a different direction. So it's someone who will take a point of view, will take a stand on an issue that they feel is really important for the workforce, but will be a behind-the-scenes person that will not be afraid to bring up an uncomfortable subject. And if we think about leaders, there can be two kinds of leaders. A leader that basically says yes to everything that's being proposed, and then there's another kind of a leader that will certainly comply with the path that's being projected, but then also is going to disagree but make recommendations for ways to do things differently. So that's really what they meant by courage, is someone that's willing to speak up behind the scenes to help shape whether it's a business line, whether it's a culture, whether it's a leader who is out of line in terms of the way that they manage their team or they berate team members, and it's someone who has the courage to step into a room, close the door one-on-one with a senior executive, and really speak the truth. And that's generally something that most CEOs today will value versus just going along with that, whatever he or she wants them to do. Does that make sense, Jan?
Absolutely. Excellent points. Thank you.
Yeah.
I see one more question focused. What are the 3 main keywords that you should put in your online resumes or CV to make it searchable?
Oh boy, that's a good question.
That's a good one.
Yeah, let me think about that. So if it's in HR, it's also going to depend if you're a generalist or a specialist. So let's just assume we're talking about a generalist because we're talking about CHROs or senior HR leaders. I think what I would, so if you are looking, if you're looking at working for a global company, I would make sure you use the keyword global because that's commonly searched. And then I would put either HR executive, CHRO, again if that's relevant, or HR business partner. And usually they also want to know if you've led a team. So you want the word leadership in there, or leading a team. I don't know, Todd, do you have any other perspective? I feel like I'm babbling on this one.
No, I totally agree, and I've actually got a CHRO profile. I got one of our clients we're working on here in front of me, and for that particular position, they're talking a lot about a people strategy, a quote, people strategy. So as these companies are trying to survive through war for talent, that people strategy is going to be very, very important. I think those are good keywords to have on your resume as well.
Mm-hmm. And I would suggest to the viewer that asked the question, or listener that asked the question, go on LinkedIn and look at a couple of profiles that you think are really impressive, and look at their words. I think LinkedIn is a good tool that can be used to not necessarily, I'm not saying to plagiarize, but you can look at what other effective leaders are saying and find out, maybe pick a couple words that make sense for you based upon their profile.
Excellent. Very good. Thank you so much, Sally and Todd. I think this was pretty eye-opening for me, some of the skills and competencies that CHROs will need to possess now and in the future. I want to remind everyone about our peer groups. If you haven't heard about them, please check out the website that's posted here. I also want to remind you that in order to receive your continuing ed credit, you'll need to fill out the survey that I will send to you very soon. So again, thank you all for being with us, and thank you, Sally and Todd. We're going to end the program now.